The more things change, the more they stay the same. I sound like a grandpa saying that in practically every video. Yet, year after year, the news cycle seems to be the same regurgitation of permutations of the same headlines. Of course, these are hard news, but headlines like this and that are just the latest additions to the big fat file of clips with similar stories. In fact, here's a timeline for you of what's becoming the norm in Hollywood and its erasure of Latinas. The LA Times reports that although Latinos make up 19% of the country, a UCLA diversity in TV report found last year they appear in only about 6% of roles across digital, cable, and broadcast shows. The rates are similar in film. The worst part is that as Latinas' absence stagnates, so do the stereotypes about them. Criminals, drug traffickers, maids, or poor. Not that some of those stories aren't worth telling, but are they the only ones? This contributes to Latinophobia, which the past president used in his hateful rhetoric.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
Okay, so what happened? Since Warner Media is merging yet again with Discovery, now called Warner Bros. Discovery, terrible name, CEO David Zaslav, who does not have a single Latino on the board, decided he was going to rebrand the whole thing. He cares about Discovery, not HBO Max.
What worked best?
Does that mean putting Discovery Plus and HBO Max together?
We will. We will come to market with one product.
Everything. CNN.
So, lots of the HBO Max original content started to go magically missing, including Anne Hathaway's The Witches. It seems, according to IndieWire, that the content being targeted for removal tends to be shows and movies that are not performing on the service, but have an opportunity for a partial write-off. Therefore, the $90 million budget Batgirl, which had wrapped production months ago and was being planned to be released on HBO Max, was slashed with the sole purpose of taking a tax write-off. The movie won't see the light of day. Ever, it seems. It's saddening to see so many Latina-driven productions struggling, representation going backwards, and an overall grim future for Latinas in Tinseltown. The paradox is seeing headlines like this one. Latinos stream more than anyone else, but are rarely on screen. 38% of Latino homes pay for cable or satellite TV and also subscribe to streaming services compared to 29% of the overall US population. Another 38% subscribe only to streaming, a figure that keeps growing each year, the researchers found. Now that you're caught up with the latest, what I'm about to tell you isn't something new. It's part of the whole movement from Hollywood to essentially say, we tried with those Latinx, Latinos, Latinas, whatever, but the shows lack creativity, imagination, numbers, appeal. Insert dumb corporate reason here, basically. They just want to meet their quotas, to look good, that's all. None of those reasons are real. Netflix, which prides itself for incremental diversity, has done okay with blacks and African Americans, but poorly with Latinas and other demographics. The LA Times wrote up an Edinburgh study that looked at movies and TV shows from 2018 and 2019, which found that, quote, some groups were better represented than others. Black and African American people were 18.9% of speaking characters in film and 60% in TV series compared to 13.4% of the population. But Latinos were far behind with 5.9% of speaking parts in movies. Behind the camera, just one film director and 2.7% of TV creators were Latino. Gosh, how awful. Wait. The study also found that women of color from specific groups were absent from much of Netflix content. Latinas were not seen in 72.2% of Netflix films. In series, Latinas were nowhere to be seen in 65.6% of shows. That's awful. It makes me laugh because below those numbers in which Netflix can pat itself in the back for doing the Lord's work, there's this statement. Quote, Netflix, which has worked with filmmakers from underrepresented groups including Dee Rees, Laverne Cox, and Jans 4, on Friday say it will invest $100 million over the next 5 years in groups that help underrepresented communities in TV and film, as well as Netflix programs to find, train, and hire new talent. Let me read this again. Invest $100 million over the next 5 years. Just to put into perspective, according to IMDb, by the fourth season of The Crown, the production budget had been $260 million, making it one of the most expensive television series in history. Stranger Things, according to the Wall Street Journal, the budget for the fourth season was $30 million per episode, which is $270 million, $100 million more than the production budget for Top Gun Maverick. Not counting the money spent in publicity, which, let me tell you, I noticed it. Did you? In fact, Narcos is the production with the highest budget centering around Latinas, but Narcos are, well, criminals. Here's what the creator of One Day at a Time, Gloria Calderon Kellett, had to say on this matter on the NPR's podcast, It's Been a Minute.
I remember, Dear White People and One Day at a Time were the two 100% on Rotten Tomatoes shows for Netflix. And Justin, who's the showrunner for that show, we were at an event talking about our show, and there was a LA Times backstage, and I got off stage and we were looking at the LA Times, and there's a full page ad for The Crown and a full page ad for Stranger Things. Nothing for our shows. We were like, oh man. I mean, I love both those shows
and
too.
And he's black, we should say. The show is very black, his show.
And I love The Crown and I love Stranger Things. And I get that those are big, exciting splash. I get it, right? So like, no shade on them. I don't want to take away from any of them, but boy, we would have liked some love too. And so that's what's difficult too, is like, did I get as much promotion as those shows? Because would we have gotten as much? And I know we're significantly less expensive, my goodness. And I get it's a business too, right? It's a business. But if networks and studios are committed to speaking to their audience, if they are committed to actually doing the work of diversity, then it does seem like the goal lines should be different for all of us. I think that they can't treat us as though we are just another show and let's throw it against the wall and see what sticks. If they're truly committed, right? If they're truly committed, then you have to say, you know what? We know how difficult it is to make a show. We know how difficult it is to get something that's critically acclaimed. Maybe we should put a little bit more love and attention into this. But look, these places they're businesses. And, I loved my time at Netflix. So no shade on Netflix. They allowed me to make the show that I wanted to make. And had they said at the beginning, hey, you get to do it for 3 seasons and that's it, I would have said, I would have jumped at it. So I don't regret a moment that I was there. It was one of the highlights of my life. But there was like just, trauma surrounding how are we loved and yet not loved, right? Like, and it was.
That is a story of being a person of color in America.
But going back to this quote, this is not enough. All the underrepresented groups will have to divide those 100 million. No wonder the Netflix shows sometimes look like cardboards and can net big audiences. The lack of resources to nourish talent behind and on screen, to develop the shows and the movies, and to publicize them a la Stranger Things has rendered a vicious cycle of excitement, Latina Bay, I made that word up, and following by cancellations equals disappointment. Name me a Latina show and I would tell you it's fleeting short-lived history. Netflix Gentify canceled after its second season. On My Block canceled after its fourth season despite its popularity on Netflix. ABC's The Baker and the Beauty canceled after one season due to poor ratings. It had a second life on Netflix, but no renewal announcement has been made and probably won't be made. Stars Vida was canceled after its 3 short seasons. Perhaps the one that hurts the most has been Netflix One Day at a Time. I still have not been able to finish the show because I'm just sad it's not going to continue churning out episodes. Cancelled after 3 seasons, then picked up by Pop TV, only to be cancelled again in the middle of its 4th season due to the pandemic. The series was adapted from a 70s to mid-80s show under the same title. It follows a multi-general Cuban-American family, a divorced mother, her children, and their grandmother, who all live under one roof. When the show was no more, Netflix said it was because it didn't reach a broad audience. Maybe spend some money on publicizing your own content. All of it. They're not going rogue since they reached a subscriber ceiling, but that's another story. Let's have a moment of silence for all the departed Latina TV shows. In fact, we now have a dearth of TV shows with Latina representation. Maybe Amazon with Love and wow, I struggle to mention any other current Latina running show. Give me some recs if you know anything. Leaving a comment below, please. Joana Ferreira writes for Pop Sugar. What's particularly disappointing about these cancellations is that now more than ever, we need the shows. Positive portrayal of Latinx communities impact not just the way we are perceived and treated in society, it also impacts the way we feel about ourselves. Positive representation let us know that we have a place in this world, that we all deserve to take up space, and that we are all deserving of greatness. It reinforces our self-worth and pride. When we see shows that negatively depict us, it can result in us feeling bad about ourselves and feeling limited to what we can actually do in this life. Lack of representation or misrepresentation can result in young Latinx folks experiencing shame surrounding their culture or added pressure to assimilate to white standards. Having watched a bunch of these shows, I can tell you a few things about how we should rethink Latina representation. Before you type "the many ways I'm going to die," I would say that shows like One Day at a Time and Gentify are important for Latina representation, but it shouldn't be our only egg basket. I think the focus to advance representation should be spread out, and I think we should do the following. Hollywood, grab pen and paper. 1. Don't label future shows Latino, Latinx, Latina, Latina, whatever. Don't. I feel like they should be presented like any other show. It already alienates audiences. Is Succession or Ozark or any other highly successful white show presented or talked about as a white show? No. Probably a comment here and there about how white those shows are, yet their brilliance outshines that sort of criticism. I also think the word Latina is charged with lots of political correctness. While I think it's important, it also divides and it alienates. So, no. This Hulu show, Rami, it's about American Muslims, but it's not so like a Muslim show. It's about a confused man who has to grapple with his place in the world and everything that surrounds it. He's still forming his identity, which in part has to do with being Muslim in America, but it's just one aspect of many other components mixed together very well. The show is just more than that, and it's fabulous. 2. In the same vein, speaking about successful shows across the board, make shows where the Latina identity plays a minor or no role in the plot of the series. I know understanding the immigrant experience and the multi-generational changes in a Latina nuclear family are important, but let's move on from just that. Just imagine a series like Succession or Barry with Latina characters at the front and center, where a big right-wing media conglomerate is at stake, or the life of a hitman wannabe actor makes for a lot of drama and a complex character study. Sure, throw some subtleties here and there to point out that the character is Latina, but don't make it the center of the action. 3. The previous point takes me to discuss the Latina representation that we can find in other shows, where the character and or the actor is Latina, but doesn't play a big part in the plot. Instead, the shows introduce Latina characters organically. Look at Euphoria with Maddie Perez and Kat Hernandez. We'll sure miss you, Kat. Levinson did not appreciate your magic. I digress. Only Murders in the Building's Mabel Mora, Pose, Blanca, Angel, and Papi, or Brooklyn Nine-Nine's Rosa and Amy. They all just seem so well placed in their environment and in the way they interact with other characters. I would also applaud Netflix for casting a Latino in a non-Latina role. I'm talking about Manuel Garcia Rulfo, who plays Mickey Haller in The Lincoln Lawyer, and it was renewed for a second season. 4. I'm pretty woke. I consider myself liberal, and I love wokeness to a certain extent. I live in New York City, so it's like living in a jar, a bubble. Pick your metaphor. Yet I felt with shows like Gentify, One Day at a Time, and Love Victor, there were various episodes where they served more like explainers on really woke conversations we're having in, for the most part, privileged and or diverse places. Gender identity, colorism, gentrification, sexual orientation, religious freedom, misogyny, all from a Latinx context or lens. It's not a bad thing that the shows talk about such issues. I appreciate it. The problem is that, to me, it seems like most shows about Latine are just taking on the task to educate non-Latinas or older generations about these relatively novel issues. It feels like a laundry list that shows are trying to go through, and when they take on this task, plots are limited. They feel contrived to fit those themes. I think it's important to acknowledge that not everything has to be explained to the viewer, and that a Soul TV show cannot represent the vast, multicultural, and diverse population that makes Latine, which is the reason we need more shows, more representation, so the next future shows don't feel like they need to please everyone.